When I grow up, I want to be a birder. For those who don't know, that's what birders call bird watching. The problem is, I saw Hitchcock's film, The Birds, when I was too young. So now I'm a little scared of birds. But I'm fascinated by them, and I love the idea of a solitary sport. Can I call it a sport? The three birders in the room just nodded vigorously, and the rest of you look confused. Birds are mysterious. They live among us, but they belong to a different realm. Think about the awe of looking up and witnessing one of those synchronized aerial dances. It's entrancing. They build nests from twigs and grass and mud, hidden places to raise their young. Some migrate as far as 50,000 miles. The next generation born with a genetic memory of how to get home. They sing. I heard a story recently about a man who used to whistle a specific tune every time he filled the bird feeder in his backyard. When the man passed away and his children went to the backyard, they heard their father's tune, sung by the birds who had learned it. Their father, in a sense, was still singing. They can be our teachers if we listen carefully. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories this evening about birds, a classic approach to the Kol Nidre sermon. And that's also the last joke of this sermon. No, really. Noah, his family, and the ark with the only life remaining on this earth finally came to a resting spot on the top of a mountain. 40 days and 40 nights of relentless rain, 40 days and 40 nights of relentless ruin. They were somehow supposed to begin again. Everyone remembers the dove with an olive branch in its beak. But before the dove, there was a raven. And unlike doves, ravens are scavengers. A raven might return to the ark with carrion in its beak, evidence of the countless corpses strewn throughout the land from this calamitous flood. A raven would reveal to Noah the signs of death, of decay and destruction that await him when he steps off the boat. I think it was remarkably courageous for Noah to have sent the raven, to begin the process of facing the immensity of the devastation that awaited him upon his return to dry ground. For a moment, Noah signals that he's willing to look at the losses that would forever be intertwined with his story. But the raven just circles the ark. And Noah, for reasons we aren't told, shifts to the dove. 3 times he sends out the gentle bird. The dove tells him it's safe to leave the ark, but Noah's life quickly descends back into chaos. The story doesn't end with a rainbow. Tasked with the project of rebuilding life, his own and humanity's, he instead plants a vineyard and gets drunk. His sons find him naked in his tent, and when he wakes up, he lashes out at his youngest son, cursing him and his descendants to a life of subjugation. 4 verses later, the text reports that Noah has died. Noah needed the dove. He needed the olive branch, that sign that life could go on, that the destruction had come to an end, that peace was possible. But he also needed the raven. He needed to confront the enormity of the tragedy he had experienced, to cry for a world destroyed, to weep for what more he could have done. He needed to tend to his own open wound before he could begin again. But he didn't. Instead, having survived a world submerged by water, he floods his own body with wine. Numbing the pain to escape his reality, he slips away from our story, a broken man unable to face his past. But every story is like a plant. It lives in its time and place, but its seeds are dispersed, carried by wind or wings to some new terrain. Noah's story and the story of the birds picks up generations later with Elijah the prophet. When we first meet him, he's on the run, fleeing from a king who has no patience for this prophet and his proclamation of drought. No rain, no dew, until the Israelites and their wicked king turn away from their idolatrous practices. It is the ecological inverse of Noah and his flood. So Elijah the prophet goes into hiding, living off what little water remained in the wadi, eating the meat the ravens miraculously brought him morning and night. Some say this was the same bird that was last seen circling the ark. But soon the wadi was completely dry, so Elijah went on the move again, this time encountering a widow at the entrance of the town. "Please, can you spare me some water and some bread?" "I have nothing," she said. "Nothing but a bit of flour and a little oil. I'm just gathering sticks so that I can go home and prepare one last meal for my son and me. V'achanuhu v'matnu. We'll eat it and then we'll die." But Elijah was undeterred. God will provide. And God did. Day after day, there was enough flour, oil, and water to keep the three of them alive. But after some time, the boy fell sick, and his life left his body. Devastated, his mother accosted Elijah. "How could you do this?" Elijah took the boy in his arms, ascended to the upper chamber of the house, and laid him on the bed. He cried out to God, and God heard his plea, restoring life to the boy's breathless body. I'm not asking you to believe in the veracity of this story. I don't know if it happened or what actually happened, but I know that our stories ask us to inhabit emotional realities, landscapes of life that mirror our own. This is a story of desperation, of life on the brink of an encounter with death. And it's a story of inexplicable grace, a second chance at life and all the pain of when that's granted and when it's not. It's a story about all the ways in which we're never the same when the shadow of death blocks the light of life. I have spent every day these past 2 months thinking about this story, about the boy and his mother and what the world looked like through their eyes. And it's not just because the story is heartbreaking and haunting. It's because the Midrash, the rabbinic commentary on this story, makes a remarkable claim. The boy, revived by Elijah, was none other than Jonah, son of Amittai. Jonah, whose story we read as the Haftarah on Yom Kippur afternoon. Jonah, the reluctant prophet who flees from his calling, who ends up in the belly of the fish, that man was this boy. That man was this boy. Hungry and hurting, scared and powerless, lifeless, and then somehow alive once again. Reborn into the same circumstances of drought and survival as before. I've read the book of Jonah many times, but I never felt I understood it. I never felt I understood him. His behavior is troubling, even infuriating. What kind of prophet runs away? Does he really believe he can escape God's calling? Why does he fail again and again to find empathy for a whole city of people whose lives hang in the balance? A man who'd rather die than live in a reality in which God forgives. A man who cannot see beyond his own suffering, caring more at the end of the story about his own discomfort when the shade-giving plant shrivels than the fate of those in harm's way. Who is Jonah? This year, for the first time, I think I understand him. He's the boy wounded by the trauma of his past and the man who cannot outrun it. When we read the story of Jonah through the lens of his childhood trauma, We see patterns of behavior that heighten our sensitivity to the tragedy of his life. We see the evidence of wounds that never closed, that rewired his mind and hardened his heart. We see a man who dissociates from both his inner and external reality, literally walling himself off in the hold of the ship while the storm raged above. He curls up into a ball and closes his eyes. How can you be sleeping? The captain of the ship shakes Jonah awake. Get up, call upon your God. But Jonah cannot face the moment. He has retreated into numbness. We see a man perpetually in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, frozen in terror, fighting with God when God forgives, fleeing from God, from his own life, from this chance to rewrite his story. And we see a man, most tragically, who is himself the recipient of a second chance at life, who cannot extend that grace to others. What is most heartbreaking about Jonah is that the trauma of his childhood could have left him profoundly empathetic towards those who are most vulnerable. It could have filled him with determination to do everything in his power to prevent for others the suffering he experienced. But it doesn't. Jonah wants the people of Nineveh, all 120,000 of them, destroyed, even after his life is saved a second time in the belly of the fish, and he finally relents to go to the city. Listen to what he says. Od 40 yom v'Nineveh nepachet. 40 more days, and the city will be overturned. A death sentence. He proclaims with certainty, with fatalism, that there will be no second chance, no way back to life. 40 days, like that flood that wiped out a whole civilization. And yet immediately the people of Nineveh, every last one, covered their bodies in sackcloth, fasted and repented of their evil ways. Who knows, the king proclaimed. Maybe God will relent. And God does. And Jonah is furious. Trauma, of course, is not a guarantor of specific behaviors in the future. But we know from countless studies that unprocessed trauma can become a distorting filter on reality. Subsequent events are interpreted in the shadow of the traumatic experience. L.L. Langer, the Holocaust scholar, wrote, "Trauma stops the chronological clock and fixes the moment permanently in memory and imagination, immune to the vicissitudes of time. In the moment of trauma, the body is mobilized by our deep instinct for self-protection and survival. But the brilliant psychological and physical mechanisms intended to keep us safe and defended against further trauma can become the very systems that lock the trauma in place." Jonah is the boy who watched his mother prepare what he thought would be their last meal. He's the boy whose life left his body. And while it was miraculous to be brought back to life by Elijah, he is brought back into the same adverse circumstances as before. In his mother's words, nothing but a bit of flour and a little oil. He's broken by it all, by a return to life that too closely resembles death. And tragically, the suffering that he himself endured becomes the only truth he knows, the only tool in his hands. So the cycle of trauma is perpetuated. I suffered, so they should suffer. Which brings us to his name. Jonah, son of Amittai. Emet Sheli, my truth, his truth. And the distorted reality of his traumatic past is that the Ninevites deserve punishment. There should be no chance at forgiveness, at starting over. He yearns for the God who sent the flood. But what he's never able to learn is that he's meant to be Jonah. In Hebrew, Yonah, the dove. The messenger with the branch in its beak, telling the traumatized survivor that life can begin again. For you, for them, for all of us. Send the dove to Nineveh, God intended. Become the dove, Jonah. But here's the problem. Before the dove, there was a raven. Before life can begin again, the raven begs us to confront the destruction, to grasp the wounds that are still open within us and among us, to examine them with tenderness and grief. The raven is a hard teacher. It can be excruciating to engage with our core wounds, to revisit the chapters in our story that broke us apart. But without the raven, the dove couldn't rebuild, not in the case of Noah, who retreated from life with wine and anger, not with Jonah, whose heart closed to others in danger, and not for us in our individual and collective stories. My friends, I know no other way forward for ourselves and for our people than through the raven. We cannot bypass the pain in pursuit of the promise. We are wounded. We have wounded. Our hearts, bodies, and souls battered by life and loss, by violence and estrangement. And we cannot and should not try to escape the brokenness. We can't outrun it. Jonah tried. And instead of confronting his trauma, of facing the immense suffering he experienced as a child, it grew within him into an ideology that condemned others to suffering. The great unknown of the Jonah story is what would have happened if he'd had the resources to work through his trauma, to integrate the pain of his past into an expansive empathy, into an affirmation of life. What message would he have preached to the people of Nineveh? How might he have identified with them? What beacon of hope, of reconciliation could he have been had he first faced the trauma of his past? But tragically, he could never become the dove because he spurned the raven and its painful message to engage with the darkness. And what about us? When the raven arrives at our doorstep, what will it hold in its beak? When the raven arrives at our doorstep, what will it take to let it in? If you're scared of the raven, you're not alone. I am too. I'm scared of how loud its call will be, how long the shadow cast by its wings. But I am more scared of what happens when we deny the raven, when the unprocessed trauma of our ancestors, our people, our lives calcify within us, when wounds never close, becoming infected and dangerous, when the possibilities of life narrow, and we retreat to numbness, indifference, and rage. So I'm asking us to be brave on this day, especially on this day of confronting death and reaffirming life, to recommit to listening to what the raven can teach us, to do the hard work together to confront the shadow so that we can once again step out into the light. Because then and only then can we find the dove. Can we be the dove? The messengers who extend the olive branch in a world of destruction, the people who see the possibility of repair, even in a shattered landscape. The dove reminds us that despite it all, there is beauty to be found in the world. That a wounded heart can love again, but only when first we bind the wounds again and again, as long as it takes, because the reclaimed love of a wounded heart is the most powerful force in the world. It's the kind of love that knows how precious and fragile it all is, the kind of love that moves us closer to those in pain, that resolves to protect the vulnerable, the kind of love that can see in one plucked branch the beginning of a nest, a safe place to call home. Because that's what the dove knows best, how to find its way back home, how to traverse long distances and unfamiliar terrain back to where it wants and needs to be. And so the dove says to us, the lost and weary, follow me. We'll find our way, and together we'll begin again. Shana Tova.